part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hello, Brooks here with the Books with Brooks monthly book club podcast. We read one book a month and then we talk about it. I'm here today to bring you a really fun episode featuring one of my true favorite people in the whole world. My friend Ruth Lichtman is a podcast producer and director turned audiobook director for Penguin Random House. So legit. She has directed some insanely big name authors and actors and books that we'll all recognize. Ruth is also an artist who lives in New York City, and she is a friend of mine from camp. I am just thrilled to talk to Ruth today about something that I think is becoming increasingly crucial in the book industry, and that's audiobooks. Hi, Ruth.
Hi, Brooks. I think I lost you right at the end when you were saying hello there. There was a little dip out in our audio connection.
I'm here.
But I can hear you now. And I'm so happy to be here. Huge fan of the pod. Very thrilled to be on it.
Amazing.
And yeah, I'm pumped to talk audiobooks.
I'm pumped to talk audiobooks. I
Big
feel
time
like
pumped.
I have to tell you, Ruth, this is an admission. I was extremely anti-audiobook until just a few years ago.
Yeah, you're not alone in that.
I realize that I'm not, and I feel like now that I love audiobooks, I do spend a lot of time convincing people to try them because I'm like, I was like you once and they've changed my life. And I don't know, I think I used to think it was cheating. Like it wasn't really reading. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. I think there are a lot of things going on. I like hear this quite a bit when I tell people what I do. And it reminds me of this thing where, I don't know if you've heard this, but when people talk about Brussels sprouts, they're like, when I was a kid, I hated them. And now as an adult, they magically taste better. And then there have been all these articles that have come out that actually Brussels, the types of Brussels sprouts we're growing these days are actually much, much tastier. And so
yes,
like when
I read that.
when I think about audiobooks now, like I think the production value has increased so much.
Yes.
As audio and podcasts have just gotten more and more popular. And then especially with the pandemic where there was this demand for content. And I think now so many more resources are being given to this form. And because of it, I think audiobooks are just getting better and better, frankly.
Yeah, I think that you're totally right. And that's such a good analogy. I think that's an analogy with the Brussels sprouts. Like, it's just not the same. They're not the same as like the books on tape that your parents used to listen to on really long car rides. Like,
although that was like, I have to say that I was into. I like really loved audiobooks as a kid. And then I went through a big void where I was like, I don't want this. Now back in the world of audiobooks.
And you're back. Yeah. Well, I think that a really good gateway drug for audiobooks is podcasts. But also, I think the way that I sort of started maybe 3 or 4 years ago was listening to nonfiction, like to memoirs and nonfiction books that were read by the author. Because it's really special to hear, and I know you do some of this, so I want to talk to you about it. But I think it's really special to hear people's words in their own voices, especially when it's like a comedian or a politician, someone whose voice and cadence and delivery is really important to the material. Like, then that's such a cool way to experience it. Like, I listened to Michelle Obama's Becoming, and she reads it. And that was just amazing. I mean, hearing it in her words, literally in her mouth, is very cool. And I think elevates the experience. And you don't get that if you just simply read it.
Yeah. I think that absolutely. There's a lot. I just worked with Nick Offerman.
That is the coolest thing ever. I'm obsessed.
It was very cool. When I found out I was directing that book, I was like, whoa. He was extremely, honestly, like his presentation as a star was very similar to his vibe just as a human being. He really loves the stuff he loves, and he's like a genuine, very deep voiced man. Just very nice. He loves his wife so much. He's a real like, is that a pejorative term, wife man. That's a thing, right? That people talk about? Wife
He's a
guy?
real wife man. No, I think you just
Is
made that
that a
up.
thing?
I like it.
Okay, well, feel free to delete that out of
Yeah.
here.
Well, I that's funny that you say that because I feel like one of my favorite audiobooks ever is The Greatest Love Story Ever Told, which is Nick Offerman and Megan Mullally, his
Yeah.
wife, the wife man's wife. It's their memoir together, and it just sounds like they're chatting. It does not sound like they've written a book. In fact, it sounded so much like they were chatting, I was almost tempted to also read the book to see if it was different. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Extremely enjoyable listening experience. And he is really obsessed with her, and it's like wife man goals
Yes,
for all of
indeed,
us.
wife man. Okay, so obviously I didn't make it up. It's a thing. You've agreed. Thank you. I'm gonna tell people that you agreed with me on that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, he's a great performer, but I think there's something really intangible in hearing. I mean, there are two having an. I was gonna say it's incredible to have an author read their own work, but I don't want to diss narrators because I'm always blown away by the voice acting craft
Yes.
and
Yes.
I just think like there's something special too as a living document of a book where you have the author reading their own words and it's encapsulated in the way they want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I also love having books with narrators because these people just it's wild to me. They'll read an entire page of text with 5 different characters who have slightly distinct voices but not accents because that's a touchy subject in the audiobook world.
Oh,
And
really?
then yes, I do want to talk about that. And they'll
I
make no mistakes. Like it's
yeah.
like flawless delivery. And I can't believe it's years of work that you're
That's
seeing
yeah, years of
come out.
training. Well, that's really okay. I think that I knew that, but I sometimes when I listen to a book with many characters that have distinct voices, I sometimes wonder like did they record this where they just read all the lines of one character and then they read all the lines of the other character and then they edited it together? But what you're saying is no, they
No, you go
switch in
straight
and
through.
out.
I mean, I remember there was I have, oh my God, this woman is incredible. I'm going to look up her name before we go, but there was like a screaming scene where it was 5 family members. Half of them were from Boston and all of them were yelling. and at the and at the drop of a hat, she was able to fluidly switch between characters that are like in my mind as close as possible. It's 2 brothers and
Yeah.
they're both yelling. They sound very similar, but they sound distinct and she's able to do it just all the way through. That's
Wow.
rare. I mean, there are also narrators where you'll take a section and then we'll say like, actually, can you go back? I want to make sure we get that again. But
Mhm.
sometimes you'll have these it's like live theater where you're enthralled sitting there as they fluidly make their way through this very complicated dialogue and back and forth between characters in a text.
Wow. Yeah, that's insane. That's some talent, okay? That's some talent. Well, let's start with the Nick Offerman book since you mentioned it. I have a couple of books here written down that you told me you've worked on recently. Obviously, the Nick Offerman one is it's called Where the Deer and the Antelope Play. Is that one
Mm-hmm.
out already, Ruth? Can people
It
listen to it?
is.
Wow. Okay. That's going to be my next listen, big time.
Brooks, I think you'll like it because the entire book is Nick talking about his experience being outdoors and our relationship to nature and land and sort of what we think of as wild in a time when increasingly like that is political. It's environmental, but also just like thinking of sort of the origin of how land has been used. And he does it with so much humor. It's great. I think it's a really nice read, but also definitely speaks to some of our hijinks at camp of being in the middle of the woods and
Yes. Our outdoor camp hijinks.
flopping
Yeah.
around on rocks.
I will
Yeah,
definitely listen
exactly.
to it. And he's so funny. So that's great. That's amazing. Tell me about something else you've directed, fairly recently.
Yeah, so I think I originally we had connected about this podcast because I had just done 2 Shirley Jackson books. So
Yes,
these
that's
are books that
right.
have been out in the world for a long time, but now we're getting the audiobook treatment, which is really exciting. And so I did one collection, which was Dark Tales, and each story, we had, I think, like 6 narrators. So it varied story to story who was telling it.
Cool.
And that was a real treat because they, like, the producing department at Penguin, in my opinion, is unparalleled. They, not only do they have incredible resources at their disposal, but also just in terms of casting, you're working with people. I've never worked with a bad narrator. Just
I'm
every
sure.
time I'm like,
Yeah.
how am I so lucky?
Mm-hmm.
But it was very cool because they were finding people where it's like, okay, an elderly woman is telling this story. So then we had a voice actress who was a little bit older, and she would do those. Whereas we had one that was like a young college girl. There were 2 stories Shirley threw in that were narrated by a man. We had Mark Deakins for that. I mean, it's very cool to like have that experience. And then I had also done her novel, The Sundial, which is very spooky, and I also found deeply hilarious as a social commentary.
Oh, I'm not
Um,
familiar with it. I mean, the only Shirley
okay,
Jackson I know is Haunting of Hill House, which we just read last month in October.
y- yes, that's. I think this is why we had originally talked about
I think so.
some podcast connections. But yeah, I loved working on that. But I really my real love is contemporary fiction. That's really probably my favorite thing I get to work on. It's not every book, but I worked on Alexandra Kleeman's Something New Under the Sun. It
Yes, yes, yes.
Have you read? No, you haven't read this one yet, right?
I haven't read it, no, but I can picture it.
I highly recommend Marin Ireland, who is just one of my favorite actresses in general, was the voice actor for this, and she did an unbelievable job. It's like a climate apocalypse novel that doesn't really feel so remote from where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about the loss of water in specifically California, but just sort of across the world. What happens when we live in a world that's sort of people are just trying to keep up appearances and not dealing with the real shit that's going on.
Yeah, I love a good
Ha-
apocalypse novel.
Me
Love
too.
it.
I've been on that. Yeah, COVID has definitely fueled that fire. I've been reading a
Yes.
lot of apocalypse lit, as they
Yes. Well,
say.
and our book for November um is also kind of apocalyptic. It's about a world where like there's been a blight and all of the forests have died.
Mm.
So there's only like a few remaining forests left and they've turned into like basically like forest Disneyland for rich
Oh
people.
my god.
So
What's the name of that
the
one?
only way you can see a tree is like by paying a bunch of money to come to this island in British Columbia. It's called Greenwood.
Ooh, I really want to read that.
Yeah, you would like it. It's very long. It's a real epic. It spans like several hundred years and many generations of this particular family. But
Oh wow.
yeah, that's our book for November
All right,
2021.
I'll be joining you in reading that and then listening to the
Please.
pod. Yeah.
Please. Okay, Ruth, when I was first emailing with you about coming on the podcast, I misapplied your title and I thought that you were a producer and director, and you
Mm,
corrected me and said, no, I am a director of audiobooks. Can you, for us laymen's who don't work in the industry, can you explain like what is the difference?
yeah. Totally. I can speak to specifically what it's like at Penguin, and I don't know if this is the same with all publishing houses. There's
Sure.
also a whole world where like things are outsourced, but Penguin is very hands-on. So they have an entire audio department, and there are these incredible producers. So what they'll do is, they get the advanced copy of these books, or they even will know if there's like an in-house author, somebody who like repeatedly publishes with the company, they'll know it's coming down the pipeline, and they prepare in advance for either casting or making preparations for the author to read their book. And then they reach out and find a director. So that would be me. The distinction is like these producers are handling casting, all the nuts and bolts, and also working along the set, like alongside the director to make sure the reading is high quality, nothing is being missed.
Got it.
In books like Nick's, there were a lot of things where you'd be like, as you're reading this, and you have to make sure you catch those and change it to as you're listening to this. And
Oh,
that's a small
nice.
example, but the producer is there, sort of making sure you're dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's, but also
Nice.
providing incredible insight into the books. I really love having these deeper dive conversations about literature with the producers I've worked with.
Yeah.
And little plug for Penguin, most of the
Plug.
producers I've worked with there are women, and the mentorship I feel is very real, and I feel like very pumped up about having a primarily women-led producing department, because in audio it does skew very male, and
Interesting.
audio engineering is still a
Hmm.
very male-dominated field,
I
so
believe it.
it's been nice to find a community of people who are also really passionate about audio and are women.
There you go. That's amazing. So walk us through the audiobook like creation process.
Yeah,
As
totally.
far as you understand it, I get that there's like this is huge, especially at Penguin Random House. Like this is a massive undertaking. I know there's a lot of people working on every book, but sort of how does it come together?
Yeah. Well, I'll start where I get it, because I think this is sort of where things start to get really fun. So I will get an offer email saying, "Hey, do you want to do this audiobook?" Often I say, "Yes, please.
Heck, heckin' yes, heckin'
I
yes.
really do want to do that." Then I get sent the text of the book, and I do a deep read. So this is everything from making sure I understand who every character is, what they should sound like, what their relationship is to the main character or the narrator, trying to sort of suss out all of those like big story details. But also, it's deep research in the sense that I want to make sure every word in the book I know how to pronounce.
Hmm.
So I make a very detailed Google spreadsheet
Oh wow.
with every word, and it's some of these are place names, like a weird town in Ohio, or um, like I did a public health book that talked a lot about the eradication of smallpox, or the near eradication of it. And so I was like listening to academic lecturers mentioning these villages in India trying to get that pronunciation right, which is really tough. And it's even tougher then to work with an author or a narrator and pass on that complicated pronunciation to them. But we
Yeah.
try really hard to get those details right.
Well, and
Um,
that's so important because I can't remember what it was, but recently I was listening to something and they were saying the city name like not the right way that the locals pronounce it, and I knew the local pronunciation and it was infuriating. It was like every time I
yeah,
heard it I was like, "No, that's wrong." So
yeah,
it like can really take you out of the
it could
listening
take you out of it.
experience. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So you want to get it right. And I think also, like, especially if you're a white person pronouncing, a white American person, and you're
for
trying to
sure.
pronounce the names of a small village in India, um, you want to make sure you're getting that shit right. This is your book, like, you want to make sure that you're representing the people you're writing about with as much clarity and, as well as much, to do right by them, basically.
Yes. It's
Okay,
important.
so that research is every word in the book, how to pronounce it, the
Wow.
characters.
Oh, also, I just want to say that I can't do this job because I pronounce so many words incorrectly, which Jake, my fiance, loves to point out. The other night I said, oh my God, I don't remember the right way to say it. I said mausoleum. And he was like,
No,
what?
no, 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 my friend. Okay, actually, Brooks, it's been very humbling for me, because I'm like, I'm a big reader. I love books. Well, that's the thing about books. And when you read these words, you don't know how to say them, and then they
That's
get
right.
locked in your brain.
That's right.
I've been saying so much shit incorrectly for years
Thank you.
and
Thank
years.
you. Thank
And
you.
the
Yeah.
worst thing is when I think it's a very straightforward word. I never researched it. The narrator says it, and I was like, "Oh, can we go back for that? I think you said blah blah blah," and they'll be like, "No, blah 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 is correct. You should look it up in Merriam-Webster." And
You
then I'll be
dumb
like,
idiot.
"Let me just double check that real quick." Yeah, it's very humbling, but
Yeah.
honestly, we all do it.
Yeah.
It's very human, and I just try to take that in stride.
Yeah.
Learning
Well, you
every
got to.
day. Learning
Hmm.
every day.
I'm proud of you.
Um,
That's tough.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely helped in showing me how much I don't know. But hopefully I'm getting better with my pronunciations. The other, wait, really quickly related to this, when
Mm-hmm.
you are directing a narrator who is, say, British, or I just worked with an amazing voice actor who's Nigerian, but was sort of playing a British voice, the pronunciations are extremely different for many, many words. And the way that you check these
Yeah.
things is that you either go to Merriam-Webster or you go to Oxford English Dictionary online and you press play for those audio samples and make sure you get it all right. But we did a lot of
Wow.
Googling. Or not
That's
Googling,
fascinating.
that online research, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. All right. So
Okay.
we're talking about the audiobook creation process and
Yes.
how it comes together.
Back to the fun stuff. So once all of that is done, I'll often reach out to the author or narrator and say, hey, is there anything you want to talk through before we get rolling, whenever that is? And more often than not, people are like, yeah, I've done this research. I just had one little question. Then we get in the studio and we just truly dive right in. So this is a unique moment post COVID where so much is remote. A lot of voice actors have home studios now, which is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
So they'll be in their home studio. I'll be in my home office. We'll be connected through Zoom and they'll be recording themselves in high quality at the studio. And that's it. And sometimes it'll be like
Wow.
they'll go into a studio in whatever city they're in. They'll have an engineer there with them. And I'm still just in my little home office, zooming in, being like, can we take that again?
Oh, one more time. Is
Yeah.
there
So
video or is it only audio?
we don't often have video because it's them in the booth and it can feel a little bit like strange that they're not really looking at me, but I'm like peeping at them the whole time. I don't like video.
You're
It
just
also
staring at them.
it cuts down on the bandwidth of the audio that I'm receiving. So I
Yeah.
often
Yeah.
will say hi with video so they know I'm not a cyborg. And then we flip that video off and it's just audio. And they're voice actors I've worked with where I do not know what they look like, but I feel like I know them
I love
very,
that.
very well because we've talked for,
I love that.
weeks at a time.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So then do you start literally at page 1 and it's like, all right, start
Yeah.
reading.
You go all the way through. Um, when I first started, I'd worked in podcast and worked on narrative podcasts. And the way we had tracked those was very different, like more like the way you would do a movie where you might take 10 takes of the same scene and then cobble together little bits of it. Because it's audio, you can cut like that. With this, it's like with most audiobooks, what you're really looking for is a fluid performance where all the takes match and you're getting it in a way that feels true to the author's voice, but you're not doing so much of that, like, okay, let's circle back to this one line on this page. You really want to stop the person in the moment and say, hey, can we take that one more time? And the
Mm-hmm.
kind of reasons I'll stop a performer or author is like a word was mispronounced, or I heard a gurgle in their throat, or the character voice didn't match up to what we had before, or like it didn't land, it just kind of fell flat. So that's the kind of thing I try to catch it as soon as it's happening so that we don't have these hiccups. And pickups is the
Yeah.
process by which, like, we'll get these from the editor once we hand off files, where they'll be like, oh, you omitted the letter A, or there's an extra article here that shouldn't be there. And then you'll hear a clip. The performer will hear a clip of what they sounded like, and then they'll repeat it back and re-record, and then they'll just cut in that one little section.
Cool.
Yeah.
So that's how it gets to be absolutely perfect.
Yes. Yeah.
And how long, I know this is a loaded question because all books are different lengths, but like how long does this take? It seems like it would take forever.
That's a good question. It does really vary. And I think actually we give more time for authors who are reading their work than we do to narrators who, as I was talking about before, are just so fluid with the performance, like
Mm-hmm.
need fewer takes to just get it perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. Let me give an example. Let's see. I just tracked a teen romance
Ooh, a
slash
teen
drama.
romance.
It was like a
Yikes.
heartthrob story, and that was a 335-page book,
That's pretty
and it,
long.
mhm. But again, the text is, the sizing of the text is a big piece of it. So because that's like high school lit, the text on the page is a little bit bigger,
Hmm.
and that took us basically 3 days in studio,
Wow.
and they're like 6-hour days more or less.
Wow.
Yeah,
Jeez. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, but it
I
really
mean, that's long.
varies.
That's a lot of time. That's a lot
The
of time to stand and record. As someone who's like, I mean, we were 25 minutes into this podcast and I'm like, I'm ready for dinner.
I'm out of breath. My mouth is sticky. My back hurts. Yeah, the thing that's wild to me is that um, the people who do this, the stamina they have, blows me away. Like, can sit down and perform for 4 hours straight and then stand up and be like, cool, I'm going to grab a glass of tea and then we can keep going. Meanwhile, I'm mostly quiet and I'm like, gotta have another Diet Coke, gotta stay alert.
There's
Ooh,
a
ooh,
Diet
ooh.
Coke gremlin. I know. Well,
Like,
another reason I couldn't be a voice actor is I really don't like tea. I hate
oh,
tea.
there are coffee drinkers, but you probably wouldn't want to do dairy. Dairy, you know, crumbs up your throat. I worked with a British voice actress, and I loved the way she said it. Where she said, "Oh, just getting a bit crumbly in here," and it would be like when her throat, like you could hear the strain. And she
Yeah.
was the one who told me about. I was telling Brooks listeners out there. I was telling Brooks about a special trick, which is
Yeah.
that
Ruth gave me excellent advice and I said, you save it for the podcast. So,
honestly,
lay it
yeah,
on us.
here we are recording, so the
Here we
time
are.
is right. Um, apples. Voice performers love to eat apples to create more saliva and cut down on the sort of like pasty, sticky saliva that creates a lot of mouth sounds,
Hmm.
which listeners hate. And let me tell you who hates them more: the engineers who are cleaning up that audio
I'm
and
sure.
editing it together, because
Yes.
it is disgusting to
Yeah.
listen to in high def. Truly, so much.
Unless
Yeah.
you're into, wait, what's it called? ASMR, mouth sounds ASMR.
Oh God, it's my nightmare. It's my honestly. I feel physically ill right now. I don't know how I've ended up in an industry where I get it. You can hear everything when somebody's in the booth.
Yeah. Hmm.
Like every stomach noise, every like pop of their bone, anything you can imagine is being heard, which is why apples is such a great trick. Really
Yeah, and you get to
helps.
listen to them crunch on those too.
Yeah, there have been I worked with someone who I loved, but her favorite snack was carrot sticks and apples, and I was like, had to excuse myself. I was like, I'm just gonna get more coffee. I need to get
Let
off
me just
these
eat these.
headphones now.
Let me just eat the loudest foods possible into
Truly the
this microphone.
crunchiest snack on planet Earth, just straight into the mic.
Hey everyone, it's JD from the Hyman Podcast. Backed by popular demand, I'm excited to let you know that new episodes of the Hyman Podcast will drop every other Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're going to continue the conversations we started last season and keep having those hard conversations. There is so much in store for you this season, and I'm excited to share it with you. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single moment. The Hyman Podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Okay, we talk a lot about at book club and on this podcast. We talk a lot about how like the narration of an audiobook can seriously make or break your experience with that story. And actually,
Yes.
this is hyper relevant, Ruth, because last month we read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. There were two members of our book club who listened on audiobook. One of them hated it so much she didn't finish. The other
Mm,
hated it so much she put it down and actually read the book.
wow.
And it was
Well,
the narration. They really,
yeah.
really, really didn't like the narrator. I don't know who it was. I haven't listened to it myself. I think it's an older recording from like the early 2000s. Obviously, this book is old.
That's what I'm saying. That's the Brussels sprout theory of mine. But yes, totally is a factor.
Yeah,
I'm
it's a
so
big
curious.
factor.
What did they not like in the narration? Because I have a lot of theories on this, and I'm very curious what they would say about like what specifically they found so grating.
I think it was overall delivery. I can't
Yeah.
remember exactly. And again, I didn't listen to it myself. But in fact, Audible removed their like test listen
Oh my god. That's so
like option
damning.
or something. So now you have to download them to listen to them or something weird like that. Because I had an experience where I downloaded a book I'd been really wanting to listen to. It was read by the author, and you could just I could tell immediately I'm not gonna be able to get through this.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't say what book it was because it's a big book. Anyway, and personal preference is not
It's
everyone's
big
gonna like
book.
everything. But
Yeah.
like, some authors they're not voice actors, right? Their voices are not like made to be listened to for 8
Yes.
hours or 15 hours or they're long. Anyway, I think that they just said like that the voice actor was kind of nasal and was very like aggressive and sort of like spoke really quickly, and I don't know. It's
Yeah.
just like it was bad vibes. Bad
That's really
vibes.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been figuring this out, and the best teacher I have is just to continue listening to audiobooks to find what I find compelling as a listener. But it is obviously so personal. And I think like the key is it's not a stage play. You're not doing a live theater performance. Like it's not,
Yes.
there's
Much more nuanced than that.
yeah, and there's absolutely interpretation both by the performer and by the director to make these calls about what works. But audio, this is something I learned from Two Up, that production company I worked for when I was working in podcasts with these two guys, Skip and Zach. And I remember we were working on a narrative podcast, and they were like, audio is an incredible medium because it is in people's ears. You don't need to go big, like
Yeah.
you're not creating an epic movie. Like you can be as small and real in your interactions as you would be in life.
Wow.
And I think that's such great advice for audio producers, that
Yeah.
what makes audio a really special medium is that it can be so intimate and so personal. And I think in my directing, like what I try to steer towards is sort of a not pared down, but like I don't want it to feel like a Broadway show in the
Right.
recording.
Right.
I want there to be enough room for the listener to hear it and still be able to form a picture in their mind of these characters or this setting that hasn't been sort of handed to them fully formed. And so, working with voice actors and authors, what you want to do is like, yeah, there's some interpretation there where they are doing some of the work for you in creating this world. But I want it to feel open enough and expansive enough that whoever's listening still has that space to make it their own. And I think, like, Shirley Jackson is a great example where it's quite complicated because the language is antiquated
Mm-hmm.
and her writing is very performative. And,
Yeah.
like
Mm-hmm.
she's putting on a show, the characters are putting on a show to make that feel contemporary and not grating is definitely a challenge. Like that's hard work. Whereas if
Mm-hmm.
you're reading contemporary fiction, it's like, oh, these are just people I know.
Yeah, this is just
People in
people I
my
know. This is
neighborhood.
how they speak. I'm really
Right.
familiar with it. Of
Right.
course. Yeah, and we talked about that a lot, just in dissecting that book, The Haunting of Hill House anyway, because even reading it, you have that experience of like, the language is more difficult and then it's a little bit meandering and nobody really
Yes.
is explicit and but I think that is hard too, is like I do think there would be a ton of interpretation going on
Mm-hmm.
when reading that material because nothing is explicit. There's a lot of like
Mm-hmm.
overtones of like love and fear, but none of it is really explicit. So when do you pull that out and when do you really lean into it
Mm-hmm.
and all that stuff? Like that would be hard.
I think also this brings up a really good point where, when you see a play and you could see Macbeth 15 times and every production of it would feel really different. People take this text, the
Yeah.
text is the same, but the way it's being delivered to the audience is quite different.
Yeah.
And in audiobooks, we don't have that yet, where you're getting like, oh, this is a read by so and so, and this is a reissue.
Do you think it's moving that way?
I wonder. I mean, I think for some of the classics, we'll definitely get there. I would be shocked if we didn't have multiple readings of Walt Whitman or Mark Twain, the old white men of America vibe. Like those will definitely get reissues.
I re-listen to the Harry Potter series every fall. It's like one of my things that I just love to do. and I listened to the versions by Jim Dale, who is
Yeah,
remarkable.
truly incredible. Just an incredible performer.
Insanely good. In fact, there was a moment I just listened to like yesterday that I wanted to talk to you about, which was like, it was Jim Dale being Ron doing an impression of Snape. So it was amazing. It was like all
Yes.
these layers, and it was incredible that I recognized what character he was doing immediately. I mean, just it's really amazing. Which is all to say, I would absolutely listen to them read by different people.
Yeah.
Like I would totally do that. That would be thrilling for me.
Yeah. I wonder if I'm curious about
It's
the
a fun
future
idea. I
of
never
it.
thought about that before. Well, but one thing that I also really like that seems to be happening more, which you've already touched on, which is, as like an audiobook more of as a production with a cast.
Yeah, the
So
multi-author reads. Pretty wild
yeah,
stuff.
it's cool.
Yeah.
Did you listen to Daisy Jones and the Six?
No, I haven't.
So that one was one that I loved because they did that. So it was a full cast. And some of them were actors of name. I couldn't tell you who they are right now, but it was like voices I did recognize.
Mm-hmm.
And so every character, I don't know if every character, I think there was still a narrator doing some of the more minor parts,
Mm-hmm.
but like all the main characters were played by different people. And that
Mm-hmm.
was really cool and like really fun to listen to and just really brought it to life. And I love
Yeah.
that. So I seek that out in audiobooks today now too.
Yeah, the multi-author reads I think is more and more going to be a thing. It's really an interesting question of how, I don't know, like, when I worked in narrative podcasting, we had it was a scored production. It was truly like a movie in your ears. Like that,
Wow.
including the audio doc I did with Crooked Media. Like there were sound effects, there
Mhm.
were, like archival montages, all of these things that are so cinematic. And I'm curious to what degree that's something that people want when it comes to audiobooks.
Yeah,
Like how much of an audience is there for that? Because I know the narrative fiction podcast world is still growing, but
definitely.
like I don't know. Yeah, I can't forecast really what the future is. I
Yeah.
worked recently, speaking of the future though, this is a slight tangent. I worked recently with an author who was telling me that her biggest fear is having her job taken away by automation. And I was like, automation? What are you talking about? And she was like, yeah, they're going to have robots who are going to read whole books and I'm going to be out of a job. And I thought she was
Oh.
messing with me. And then the engineer was like, yeah, I've heard some that are pretty good. I
I
was
don't
like,
know. I don't
I,
know because like you said it's so personal. Like
yeah,
you I mean, I think you need a human voice. Yeah, that's really
there we
interesting.
go.
I
Approaching
thought
the
you were going to
singularity. You
say
never
like
know.
you see those videos that are like I made a bot write Hallmark
Yeah.
movie or whatever.
Yeah.
Those are really
And
funny.
they do a great job with
And they do a
this.
really good job. Yeah. Okay, Ruth, I feel that I could talk with you about this endlessly because you are so interesting and so smart and I am so into audiobooks and literature, but we're sort of coming up on time, so I'd love to close with asking you if you can share with us like a funny story from a project you've done so that we can
Mhm.
all feel really cool and like we have insider knowledge.
Ooh, okay. So this is another. Celebs are really popular as cool insider knowledge. So
Yeah,
I'll drop
true.
another celeb bomb on you.
Okay.
I worked with Phoebe Robinson on her latest book. Please don't sit on my bed in your outside clothes. First of
Yes.
all,
Okay.
she,
I keep thinking about that now. Every time I like go into my room, I'm like, oh, I'm in my outside clothes. I can't sit on this
yeah,
bed.
she changed me. I do think about it a lot now. She's one of the most she was an incredible performer and so nice to work with. Phoebe, if you're listening, huge fan. It's
God,
truly a
if
delight.
only. Phoebe's listening to
Um,
this. We've made it.
I know, truly, we've cracked through. She's like, you guys, cool it down. Her husband, I don't know how closely you follow her social media. Her partner, not her husband, British Bake Off, as he's called, is a Brit, and so is our engineer. And there are enormous sections in her new book where she is shitting on British people and making fun of their accents.
Amazing.
they're in the studio together. I'm like zooming in, and she's doing like the worst Cockney accent I've ever heard, and talking about how like British people don't have taste and their food is bad and like their teeth are bad. And then she was like stopping herself mid-performance to talk to the engineer and be like, please don't hold this against me. He unmutes himself on the mic, makes one snarky, like quintessential British retort to her, and then wheezes laughing for 25 minutes. Like, we completely were undone in the studio. It was impossible to continue.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, she also apologized. There was some really great scatological humor moments in the book, and she would apologize to our engineer, not to me. And I was like, Phoebe, he gets an apology for hearing the scatological humor, but
Wait,
I
what are you
don't.
saying? Do you mean like poop jokes?
Yes, Brooks, I do mean poop
Scatological
jokes.
humor. Oh, that's amazing.
Clearly, in my alternative reality or whatever, I'm like a 4th grade teacher and saying scatological humor a lot to scold my students.
Scatological humor.
Anyway, Phoebe was like, Ruth, you're in the inner sanctum. I can talk about poop with you anytime.
Wow.
Really made me feel good.
Holy cow. That is huge. Wow, Ruth.
I feel like I need to print it out and put it on my wall.
You should. Make a fridge magnet or something.
Very proud of that moment. And to all the listeners out there, and Brooks, you already know this, but you can talk about poop with me anytime too.
Thank you so much. That's so sweet.
You're welcome.
Maybe we'll do another we'll do a scatological episode later for the rabid fans.
Yeah, great. We'll put that right on the web. I'm sure it will go viral. Hot content.
Bye. Hot. Ruth, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about audiobooks. I hope that this episode has been interesting and educational to all of our listeners, and that if you were on the fence about audiobooks, or if you were like Ruth and I at some point, anti-audiobook, that maybe this will change your mind and you'll give it a little listen.
Brooks, thank you so much for having me. This was a total pleasure.
A delight, my friend. Well, we'll sign off by saying happy reading and happy listening.
Ooh!
Books with Brooks is produced by Mo Barrow with theme music by Jonathan Allen. Books with Brooks is part of the Press Play Podcast Network, which empowers hosts to create high-quality professional shows that inspire and entertain. If you've been dreaming of hosting your own podcast, we can help. Please email content@pressplaypodcasts.com to get started today. Please be sure to subscribe to get the latest episodes wherever you listen to podcasts.